Hello and welcome to Cover, our semi-regular review of sporting books where I give you my opinion and nobody else's opinion on what's on the bookshelves at the moment. If you've got a book you'd like us to review, you don't have to be a publisher, by the way, as today's book will prove, then just get in touch with us. Or indeed, if you'd just like to respond to any of the things that I've been saying, there's the email address on your screen, sean.everett@supersport.com. Let's crack on then with today's book, and here it is, Tokkie Smith and the Colour of Rugby by John Death, published in February last year and available as a Kindle or a hard copy from Amazon. But I recommend you go to tokkiesmith.com and navigate from there. What's it about? Three things, really. The creation of the Hong Kong Sevens, the first multiracial tour of South Africa, and the life of Tokkie Smith, a South African-born rugby administrator who spent much of his life in Hong Kong and helped make the first two things happen. Well, I confess I'd not heard the name before reading the book, and over the years, many have claimed to have invented the Hong Kong Sevens, but Tokkie seems to have as good a claim as any. He's acknowledged by the official Hong Kong Sevens website and many others, including Wikipedia. It seems that a liquid lunch with a potential sponsor was the seed that grew into one of the world's great sporting events, and there are an awful lot of liquid lunches in the Tokkie Smith story. In 1959, aged 25, he arrived in Hong Kong from South Africa, having grown up in East London, set up a business, began to play rugby on the island, and then moved swiftly into administering the game. The book offers a fascinating peek into how the rugby establishment worked in the 1960s and the 1970s, a little bit like a stranglehold, how the younger generation fought to break that stranglehold of England's Rugby Football Union. Younger readers who know Hong Kong through the filter of China will not recognise the small colonial protectorate portrayed here. The first half of the book charts Tokkie's progress through the game to the founding of the Sevens. With no support from the RFU or the International Rugby Football Board, the first tournament went ahead without a single representative from the Five Nations. But New Zealand and Australia both sent teams, and crucially for the popularisation of the Sevens code, the rugby magicians from Fiji were there, and they won the second Sevens in 1977. It took a few years to get going, but by the mid-80s, the Hong Kong Sevens was the biggest rugby party on earth. I was lucky enough to commentate there several times in the 1990s, and I'll never forget New Zealand's Sevens genius, Eric Rush, talking about how if the entertainment faded at any stage during the day, you could always turn around and watch the rugby. The second half of the book deals with the rise and fall of Tokkie, whose idea to tour South Africa with a multiracial team in 1982 seems to have been largely forgotten. It was the result of a meeting in 1981 between Tokkie and Dr. Danny Craven in Stellenbosch. Craven promised that sponsors would foot the bill if Tokkie could provide the team. And Tokkie did just that, putting together a blend of Asian, Pacific Island and North American players, which the book claims to be the first multiracial touring team, rugby touring team that is, to South Africa in history. 60s Springbok Dave Stewart, father of Christian, was provided to coach the team, and there's a lovely photo in the book of Stewart and Mornay du Plessis smiling alongside two of the tourists, Song Kun Po, the captain of Singapore, and Koliti Ma'u from Tonga. They were known as Tokkie's Dragons, and along the way they beat Bulan, Natal and the Free State in a month-long tour. But it was a tour that came at a huge cost because it broke the Glen Eagles agreement. Song Kun Po was banned for life by the Singapore Rugby Union, and Tokkie and Hong Kong's best player, Chris Win Potts, were blacklisted and added to the UN's register of sports contacts with South Africa. Tokkie was astonished at the treatment handed out to him and his players, but he shouldn't have been. The tour came less than a year after the Springboks' flower bomb tour to New Zealand, and just 4 months after Graham Gooch's Rebel cricket tour to South Africa. Tokkie's Dragons were hardly operating in a vacuum, and that even if they earned a fraction of the money paid to Gooch's Rebels. Nevertheless, Tokkie was perhaps within his rights to cry hypocrisy when Ireland had played 2 tests against the Boks in this country in June 1981, and England would play 2 more in 1984. It would be fascinating to track down the Dragons tourists 40 years later and hear their stories. Sadly, we can't track down Tokkie. He died in a car crash on the garden route in 1985, just short of his 50th birthday. This book is an attempt to give Tokkie a place in the sun, and for author John Death, who played alongside him in Hong Kong, it was clearly a labour of love. Tokkie comes across as a gregarious, if naive personality who wanted simply to expand the game of rugby. I was a little disengaged with the first half of the book. Too much emphasis I felt on social criming and endless committee meetings, and I felt that far too little time was spent on the reality of the Hong Kong Sevens. It's almost as though the Sevens is hiding behind the door, waiting to be discovered, and once out in the open, it's almost dismissed as an irrelevance. Given that the Sevens is part of the book title, I would have expected much more on those first three groundbreaking tournaments, and particularly how they acted as a springboard for the development of the game in Asia. But the second half of the book largely redeems it, with an intriguing look into the Dragons Tour and the legacy of sports apartheid from an underreported point of view. I give it a worthy 5 out of 10, and I thank Chris Wynne Potts for bringing it to our attention. Chris is in the book and now lives here in South Africa, and he felt that this book needed a wider audience, and I do hope that it does do exactly that. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Remember to keep your head down and your reading light on, and try and stay away from that third wave.